My wife cheated, said I didn't own her, wanted an open marriage. I filed for divorce. Life had been routine, but everything changed overnight. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into the story of a man named Jack, who faces a major life upheaval, the collapse of his marriage. Have you ever experienced the feeling of betrayal, or had everything you thought was stable suddenly fall apart beneath your feet? Can you ever rediscover yourself after losing what mattered most? Follow Jack's journey to see how he navigates through these challenges and whether life can be rebuilt from the wreckage. Thank you for stopping by, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep me motivated to bring more meaningful stories your way. Let's get started. It was a typical Wednesday morning in Oakwood, a small town tucked away between rolling hills and serene lakes where life moved at its own slow pace. This was the kind of place where the local diner knew your order by heart, where you greeted your neighbors by name every time you saw them, but somehow no one really knew what was going on behind closed doors. Oakwood wasn't just a town, it was a community, a place where everyone prided themselves on being connected even if they never truly connected at all. My name's Jack Williams, and at 42, I was your average guy, living the average life. I had two beautiful girls, Emily and Lily, both of whom were growing up way too fast. And then there was Grace, my wife, the woman I once thought I knew better than anyone else. Together, we built a life that fit the mold of what people called the American dream. A house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, the perfect little family. But like most dreams, they aren't as perfect as they seem from the outside. Dreams can fade, and when they do, it's never as dramatic as you might think. It doesn't come with thunder and lightning or some monumental shift. No, sometimes it's a slow, almost imperceptible drip, like rain falling gently but steadily until one day, everything's flooded and you don't even know how you got there. It's strange how life works. I met Grace in college. We were both ambitious, full of dreams and hopes for the future. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, intelligent, strikingly beautiful, with a fire in her that could light up any room. We clicked instantly, and what started as a whirlwind romance quickly turned into something more serious. I remember the way she laughed, her voice full of life and excitement. Her passion was infectious, and in the midst of my uncertainty about the future, she made me feel like I could take on anything. We married young, a decision that made sense at the time. Life seemed to move quickly, so quickly, in fact, that we didn't question the pace. We got a house, then came the kids, Emily first and then Lily. Our world, for a while, was made up of birthday parties, family dinners, and weekend trips. We lived by routine and it worked. Or so I thought. The house was a reflection of us, warm, lived in, filled with laughter and the messiness that comes with raising children. There were Lego sets scattered across the living room floor, half-finished art projects pinned to the fridge, and shoes left by the door that I often tripped over. It was our life, chaotic but perfect. At least, that's how it felt to me. Grace and I, we were good together. We balanced each other out in ways that made sense. I'd take care of the house, the repairs, the maintenance, the little things that kept our world running. Grace managed the bigger picture, the kids' schedules, the family holidays, the plans for the future. And it worked. She was the backbone of our family, the one who kept everything running smoothly, and I was the steady presence, always there to support her. But recently, something had shifted. It wasn't something that hit me all at once, but I started noticing it more and more. Little things that used to feel familiar suddenly seemed foreign. Grace had always been the first one up in the morning, making breakfast for everyone, setting the tone for the day. But recently, I'd wake up alone, and by the time I came downstairs, she was already on her phone, checking emails or scrolling through social media. Her usual smile, the one that greeted me every morning, had become less frequent. I started to notice that she was coming home later and later from work. It wasn't that she was working overtime, I knew her schedule well enough to know that wasn't the case. She would just come in, almost apologetically, her eyes tired but not explaining why. At first, I thought nothing of it. Life had become busier. The kids had their own activities, my job was demanding more of my attention, and Grace, being the ever-organized planner, was juggling it all with a calm I envied. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between us grew in subtle ways. Grace had always been so present. Our late-night talks, where we'd reminisce about our college days or plan for the future, had become a rarity. Now, her responses to my questions felt automatic, like she was simply going through the motions. She'd smile when she had to, laugh when she needed to, but there was a detachment in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. I remember one evening, after a long day, sitting in the living room, trying to talk to her about the kids' school projects and how they were both struggling with their grades. But instead of the usual back-and-forth discussion we'd have, she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. She wasn't really listening, not the way she used to. I brushed it off at first, assuming she was just tired. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It's hard to explain, but I felt a shift in our relationship, a slow pulling away that I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing more than stress. After all, who didn't go through tough patches in their relationship? We were both getting older, the kids were becoming teenagers, and life was getting more complicated. Maybe this was just one of those phases. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Grace and I had always been able to talk about anything, but now there was this quiet tension that lingered between us, one that neither of us could really address. I began to wonder if it was just me, if maybe I was overthinking things. But even then, the questions started to build. Why is she coming home so late? Why does she seem so distant? And then one afternoon, something happened that made the growing unease unbearable. I walked into the kitchen and there she was, wearing a new perfume. It wasn't the kind she wore on special occasions. No, this was different, softer, more floral, something I hadn't smelled in years. She had always had a signature scent, and this wasn't it. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged it off, saying it was a gift from a friend. But for some reason, that moment hit me harder than I expected. It was as if, in that one instance, the small pieces of doubt that had been accumulating in my mind suddenly snapped into place. Something had changed, and it wasn't just the perfume. I tried to dismiss it at first, but the feeling stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I could no longer ignore the distance between us. This wasn't just about a busy life or a phase. Something was off, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. It was a crisp evening, the kind where the air feels fresh with just the right amount of chill. I was sitting on the porch, the faint sound of leaves rustling in the wind filling the air as I sipped my coffee. I'd gotten into the habit of doing this lately, just sitting alone, taking a moment to reflect before the day wound down, before the house became alive with the sounds of the kids and the busy life I was constantly a part of. It was peaceful in its own way, but there was something that felt out of place. I glanced over at Grace as she walked past me, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. She was wearing a perfume I hadn't smelled in years. It wasn't her usual scent, the one that I had become so familiar with over the years, the light, floral one she wore on our dates, or the more neutral, casual fragrance she used for work. This one was different. Stronger, more assertive, almost like she was trying to cover something up. I didn't say anything, but the unease began to grow in my chest, twisting in a way I hadn't felt before. It wasn't that she was wearing perfume, it was the fact that it was so unfamiliar. Something was off. I tried to brush it off. I mean, who was I to question her choice of perfume, right? People change. Sometimes we buy things on a whim, or we just feel like trying something new. But this was different. It wasn't the perfume itself, it was the way it made me feel. The subtle shift in the air, as though a curtain had been pulled back ever so slightly, revealing a truth I wasn't ready to see. Over the next few weeks, the signs became more apparent, and it was like trying to ignore a growing crack in a wall that was slowly spreading. Grace had always been someone who kept a tight schedule, and I respected that. We had a rhythm. But suddenly, she was leaving more often for late meetings with colleagues. Meetings that she would normally mention but now seemed to be slipping through the cracks. I couldn't recall the last time she'd told me about what went on during those late nights at the office. And even when she did talk about it, it felt off. She'd mention the usual details, a team project, client calls, but there was no real connection, no real spark in her voice when she spoke about it. Her wardrobe started to change, too. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was just small things, the way she started to dress a little more put together for errands, a bit more makeup on her face when she ran to the store, clothes that showed a little more skin than usual. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself again. I didn't want to overanalyze, but I couldn't ignore how these little changes started to add up. Why was she suddenly taking more care with her appearance for what seemed like the most mundane tasks? I tried not to read too much into it. Life gets busy. We all go through phases. Maybe she was just stressed with work, trying to balance everything like I had been. But deep down, something didn't feel right. These were changes I couldn't just brush off. They felt intentional, calculated. And I couldn't shake the nagging thought that there was more to it than she was letting on. The realization crept in slowly, like fog rolling in from the lake outside our house. It was subtle at first, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. One Friday night, things reached a point where I couldn't stay silent any longer. Grace had been acting distant all week, her usual warmth replaced by a coldness I couldn't explain. She'd been coming home late from work, her excuse always the same: I had to stay late to finish up the project, or we had to work through some client issues. But that night, she came home after midnight. I was sitting on the couch, my usual spot in the living room, trying to unwind after a long day. The house was dark, save for the dim light from the TV, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the background. When she walked in, I noticed how disheveled she looked. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes weren't as neatly put together as when she left earlier. She quickly walked past me, not even glancing my way, and headed upstairs. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as I watched her go, but I didn't say anything. She brushed it off when I tried to ask earlier about her day. When she didn't come downstairs to say goodnight, my suspicion turned into something heavier, a gnawing, uncomfortable feeling that wouldn't go away. I waited in the dark for what felt like hours, but she didn't return. It wasn't the lateness that bothered me. I'd long gotten used to her working late, even when it didn't sit well with me. What bothered me was how she came home, how she seemed almost different. The change in her behavior, the way she avoided my questions, the way she didn't engage with me in any meaningful way. It was like she was trying to keep a distance, as if there was something she was hiding, something she didn't want me to know. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of the house settling around me only added to the tension that was building inside. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had been going on. Was I just being paranoid? Was I overreacting? Or was something truly happening that I wasn't ready to face? The doubt continued to churn inside me. I tossed and turned, thoughts swirling, and I found myself questioning everything. Was this just a phase? Was it stress at work? Or was this the beginning of something much darker, something I couldn't fix with just patience and understanding? It was a cruel irony. I had been the one who always believed in the strength of our relationship, in the vows we had made to each other, the promises of loyalty and love. But now, I couldn't help but wonder, had Grace been quietly preparing to break those vows for a while now? Or had I simply been too blind to see it? The next morning, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. I forced myself to go about my day, hoping that the doubt would fade as I immersed myself in the routine of work and family. But deep down, I knew things had changed. Something had shifted between Grace and me. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I could feel the distance growing, even though we were still living under the same roof. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living in a house with a stranger. Knock knock. Now you're about to watch the best part of the story. But before that, make sure to subscribe to my channel so we can keep going together. The next morning, I sat at my desk, the familiar hum of my office around me. I had been with the company for over a decade, and at this point, everything felt like a well-oiled machine. My coworkers were chatting in the break room, the sounds of keyboards clicking and phones ringing were as commonplace as the air I breathed. But none of that mattered in that moment. The moment I picked up the phone, my world tilted. It was Daniel, my best friend, the one person I always turned to for advice. He'd been skeptical of relationships, especially marriages. Always cynical, always the realist, but never the bearer of bad news. Not like this. Jack, you need to know something. Daniel's voice was low, almost strained. Grace has been seeing someone else. I didn't want to tell you, but I can't just sit here and let you be blind to it anymore. I don't know how long it's been going on, but it's real. My heart sank. For a moment, everything around me stopped. The noise, the voices, the world, all of it faded into a blur. I couldn't breathe. I could barely think. My fingers went numb as I held the phone to my ear, staring at the desk in front of me. The only sound that existed was Daniel's words echoing in my head over and over again. I didn't know how to react. Anger, confusion, betrayal, they all hit me like a truck, and in that moment I was paralyzed. I never thought Grace could do something like this. My mind raced, trying to process the weight of his words, but the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The late nights at work, the change in her behavior, the growing distance between us. I thought back to the moments I had brushed off. Her late-night meetings that I never questioned, the way she became more distant, less engaged in our daily lives. All of it had been there, right in front of me, and I had ignored it. Why? Because I didn't want to believe it. Because I trusted her. I trusted us. The clock ticked loudly in my ears as I tried to collect my thoughts. My heart was racing, but I could feel it sinking lower with each passing second. Daniel's voice was still in the background, but I barely registered his words anymore. All I could think about was Grace. My Grace. The woman I had built a life with, the woman who had stood beside me through everything, had betrayed me. The woman I had trusted with my heart and soul had shattered that trust in a way I couldn't even begin to fathom. The phone call ended, but I didn't know what to do next. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, responding to emails, attending meetings, pretending like everything was fine, but inside, I was a mess. I couldn't focus. My mind was racing, replaying every moment I had spent with Grace, every interaction, every touch. How could she do this? Why would she do this? I felt like I was losing control of everything. The world around me was still moving, but I was stuck in place, paralyzed by the truth that had just been laid bare. The anger inside me was building, but so was the crushing sadness. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to confront her, to hear the truth from her mouth. The kids were at their grandmother's, and for the first time in a long time, it was just the two of us in the house. I could feel the weight of the silence as soon as I walked in. The air was thick with tension. Every step I took felt like it was leading me towards something I wasn't ready to face. I found Grace in the kitchen, her back to me as she busied herself with something on the counter. She didn't even turn when I walked in. The normal, comforting presence of her was gone, replaced by something distant, something cold. I stood there for a moment, my hands clenched by my sides. Every part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't move. Not yet. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be. "Grace," I said, and she turned, her face an unreadable mask. "We need to talk." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt. She looked away quickly, her gaze dropping to the floor. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know. I couldn't live in the dark anymore. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly as the words left my mouth. "Is it true that you've been seeing someone else?" She froze. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, try to cover it up, but she didn't. She looked at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. "Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you. But I can't stay in a marriage where I don't feel alive anymore." I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. The words didn't make sense. How could she say that? How could she say she loved me but wasn't happy with me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, to demand answers, to get the closure I so desperately needed. But instead, I just stood there, frozen. Grace continued, her eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to try an open marriage. But I was too afraid to tell you. I didn't know how to make you understand." For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. An open marriage? Was this some kind of sick joke? Had all the years we had spent together meant so little to her that she could just throw it all away? How long had she been unhappy? And why hadn't she said anything? Why had she let me believe everything was fine, let me pour my heart into a marriage that was, in hindsight, crumbling from the inside? I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. The anger inside me was bubbling to the surface, but underneath it was something worse, a deep, searing pain that I couldn't escape. My whole world, everything I had built with Grace, was falling apart and I couldn't stop it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You've been seeing him for months," I said, more to myself than to her. "How long did you think you could keep this from me?" Her tears fell, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. I couldn't pretend anymore. Not after everything she had done. In that moment, I made the decision. It wasn't something I wanted, but it was something I had to do. I filed for divorce. The words came out in a whisper, but they were final. They echoed in my ears, in my heart. And in that moment, I knew I would never be the same again. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Faster than I had anticipated. Grace moved out within a matter of weeks, and as part of the arrangement, the girls stayed with me during the week. The first few months were the hardest, no doubt. Adjusting to the silence in the house, the empty spaces, and the constant reminder of what I had lost. Each corner of the house seemed to hold a memory, a laugh, a glance, a touch. The girls were great. They were resilient, stronger than I had given them credit for, but I could tell they were struggling too. The transition wasn't easy on them, and it wasn't easy on me either. They tried to be brave, but I could see it in their eyes. They missed their mother, even though they'd never admit it. And I missed Grace. Even after everything, a part of me still wanted the life we had built together. But I knew deep down that life was never going to be that simple again. Loneliness settled in with me like an unwanted guest. It wasn't just the absence of Grace. It was the weight of the house, the kids, the unspoken words, and the unanswered questions. My world had been upended, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Guilt gnawed at me. I questioned myself constantly. What could I have done differently? Where did we go wrong? Was there something more I could have done to save our marriage? But I wasn't the only one affected. I started to see the changes in my daughters, Emily with her quiet demeanor, and Lily, always the more outspoken one. Both of them were slowly growing, their personalities blooming in the aftermath of the storm. It was tough for them, and I could see it. We'd have dinners where they'd talk about school and their friends, but there was always an undertone of sadness that no one ever mentioned out loud. It wasn't just my daughters who gave me a reason to keep going. My friends, too, played a part in my healing. One of the first calls I made after Grace moved out was to Daniel. He had always been my sounding board, someone who knew the depths of my relationships, both romantic and platonic. He didn't have the answers, but he listened. And that was enough. Over time, I found solace in my work, in the routine of going to the office, the small victories at the end of the day. Each task, no matter how small, felt like an accomplishment. I started to dive deeper into my projects, finding fulfillment in things I had once taken for granted. The structure of my job provided a small escape, a way to shut off the noise in my head for a few hours. But it wasn't just work that kept me going. It was also the responsibility of being a father. My girls needed me even if they didn't always show it. They needed consistency. They needed to feel safe, loved, and anchored. I promised them, and more importantly, I promised myself that I wouldn't let the divorce ruin the person I was, the father I had been, and the father I wanted to continue to be. I was determined to rebuild my life, even if it seemed impossible. I wasn't going to let this be the end. A year after the divorce, things started to feel different. I had moved to a new apartment in the city, closer to work. I wanted a fresh start, away from the memories that haunted every room in the old house. The new place was small, but it was mine. No more reminders of what I had lost, no more ghosts from the past. It felt like I was shedding old skin, ready to embrace a new chapter, even if I didn't know where that chapter would lead. The apartment was minimalist, almost barren when I first moved in. I took my time making it feel like home. Little by little, I added the things that mattered: pictures of the girls, a few plants, a comfortable chair by the window where I could read or just sit and think. The change of scenery was liberating. I began to go out with friends more often, reconnecting with people I had unintentionally distanced myself from during the turmoil of my marriage. I started to feel like myself again, not the person I had been with Grace, but a version of me that had been hidden for so long. It was a strange feeling, getting to know myself again. I was learning how to be alone without feeling lonely. I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten about: hobbies, interests, desires that had taken a back seat to the needs of my family. It felt good to laugh again, to talk without hesitation, to meet new people. One evening, I was at a local bar with a few colleagues when I met Rachel. She was sitting at the bar, casually talking to a friend when I noticed her. There was something about her that was different, something refreshing. She had a quiet confidence, an easygoing charm that put me at ease. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were laughing about old movies, talking about travel, and just enjoying the simple joy of conversation. We kept in touch over the next few weeks. What started as casual conversations turned into more frequent outings. Rachel was kind, patient, and above all, understanding. She was someone who had been through her own heartbreak, someone who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. And in that shared experience, we found a common bond. Rachel wasn't just a distraction. She wasn't someone I could use to fill the void left by Grace. No, Rachel was different. She understood me in ways I didn't expect. We didn't rush things. We didn't need to. Our friendship was built on a mutual respect for each other's struggles, for the lives we had lived before, and for the people we were becoming now. We began spending more time together. Dinners, hikes, afternoons at the local farmer's market. Rachel didn't pressure me, didn't try to fill the silence with words that didn't need to be said. She allowed me to be myself, flawed, broken, but healing. And in her presence, I felt like I was getting closer to the man I was meant to be. Not the man I thought I had been, but the one I had always been beneath the layers of hurt and confusion. As for Grace, we continued to keep in touch. Not much, but enough to stay in the loop about the girls' lives. She had moved on, and I had accepted that we were both better off apart. We spoke from time to time, usually about the girls' activities, school events, and holidays. I could tell that she had found someone else, and I didn't mind. She had her own life to live, just as I had mine. But there was still a part of me that wondered, was there ever a chance that we could have made it work? Was it too late for us to rebuild what we had? I didn't think so. I didn't think I could ever forgive her for what she had done to me, to us. But I didn't hold onto that anger anymore. The more I watched the girls grow, the more I realized that life had to go on. And maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. Maybe not in the way I had expected, but in the ways that were still possible. Conclusion. Looking back on everything, I realize how far I've come. I've learned that even in the darkest moments, you can find light. The pain of betrayal never really goes away, but with time, you can learn to live with it. I'm not the same man I was when I married Grace, and I'm certainly not the man I was during our divorce. But I'm stronger, wiser, and more aware of what I truly want in life. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. What do you think about the story? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below with your impressions or any feedback you have. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next story coming your way. Thank you for sticking with me till the end. Your support means the world. See you in the next one.